Hello and welcome to Eyewitness with me, John Rees. Sunday the 15th of May marked the 63rd anniversary of the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe and the creation of the State of Israel. The scale of the devastation was overwhelming. 4 in 5 Palestinian villages inside the borders of the new state were ethnically cleansed as hundreds of thousands of refugees fled their homes. Referring to these refugees, Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, famously said that the old will die and the young will forget. In fact, rather than forgetting, the Nakba has become one of the central foundations for activism by Palestinians and their supporters around the world. Last weekend's protests were on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of refugees marched on Israel's borders. In the captured Golan Heights, hundreds of Palestinians broke through fences demanding their right to return. The demonstrations were also accompanied by a tragedy. At least 16 demonstrators have so far been confirmed dead and hundreds more injured. In the West Bank also, Israeli security forces arrested protesters, while police in Jordan and Egypt used tear gas on crowds outside the Israeli embassies. Palestinians have always resisted the occupation of their homeland, and many now feel that the popular uprisings sweeping the Middle East have breathed new life into their cause. 4 months since President Ben Ali was driven out of Tunisia, today we ask whether this weekend's demonstrations mark Palestine as the new frontier of the Arab Spring.
The Nakba, the great Palestinian catastrophe brought about by the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, has come to define the Palestinian struggle. Thousands were forcibly evicted from their homes, with 4 in 5 Palestinian villages inside the new borders depopulated and destroyed. Many of those joining the protests last weekend carried with them the keys of the homes they left behind. The buildings may have long since vanished, but the keys remain a poignant symbol of the Palestinians' struggle to return. Both the Israeli and neighbouring governments had made provisions for the annual demonstrations, yet all were caught off guard by the scale and audacity of this year's rallies. This remarkable footage captures the moment when hundreds of refugees marched on the Israeli border in the Golan Heights. At first, people nervously test the fences as concerned onlookers on the other side shout warnings that landmines are hidden close to their feet. Then, finally, one man scales the fence and crosses over from Syria. Soon a steady stream of people cross the buffer zone to jubilant welcomes from their supporters on the other side. However, this weekend's demonstrations, the largest for decades, were marred by tragedy as Israeli soldiers opened fire on protesters on the Syrian border, injuring hundreds and killing at least 2. In similar scenes, at the Lebanese border village of Maroun al-Ras, 8 protesters were shot dead, while at least 1 Palestinian was killed and up to 80 others wounded in northern Gaza. Protesters also clashed with Israeli soldiers and plainclothes security officers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Yet the mood of Palestinians remains defiant. President Mahmoud Abbas has called those who lost their lives over the weekend martyrs, whose blood had not been spilled in vain. Feelings on the street are just as strong.
This confirms that Israel is afraid and terrified of every Palestinian, and it will be even more terrified when it sees that our children are growing up, learning that Palestine is ours.
Many see Palestine as the new frontier of the Arab Spring uprisings. Fatah and Hamas are making tentative steps towards unity, and the removal of Mubarak in Egypt has the potential to fundamentally change the political dynamics of the region. The scale of this year's Nakba protests was unprecedented. Inspired by the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, Palestinians approached the demonstrations, both emboldened by the example of their neighbours and also with a fresh hope that real change is on the horizon.
Joining me in the studio today is Sarah Colburn from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Tunisian activist Karitha Ferjani, whose father was a long-standing political opponent of President Ben Ali. Welcome to you both. Sarah, so is this the Arab Spring erupting into the logic of Palestinian politics now?
I would put it around the other way, because I think Palestine has been a central focus to the Arab Spring, and actually the steadfastness of the Palestinians over 63 years and longer, struggling for their independence and against occupation, I think has been an inspiration around the region. And obviously we have seen that that there have been very serious difficulties that the Palestinians have had to overcome, the issue around the divisions that were created effectively by Israel and the United States. But I think that Palestine has always been at the heart of the Arab Spring, and I think these demonstrations simply prove that.
There was in Tunisia as well, Karitha, there was very big demonstrations, despite the fact that there are also serious and unresolved problems within the Tunisian revolution itself.
I mean, yeah, of course, Palestine has always been an essential, crucial part of all the whole Arab world. Thousands of people came out yesterday in Tunisia. Like, you couldn't actually see any road left because there's so many people out there. I mean, even in Libya, within the first week of their protesting, they're being shot at and they're saying, Palestine, we're coming for you. I mean, it doesn't matter whatever struggles we're going through. Palestine has always been at the core of the majority of the Arab world, and their resistance, they've always been an inspiration to us, and they've always been a special people for all of us as well.
I mean, Sarah, I take your point about the longevity of the Palestinian issue, but there are certain elements now that simply wouldn't exist without the Egyptian and Tunisian revolutions. I mean, the whole dynamic now between Egypt and Palestine is a direct result of the fall of Mubarak.
Absolutely, yes.
So that must therefore, that change is emboldening Palestinians.
And it's a very, very positive change. The fact that we've got the new Egyptian foreign minister saying that the siege on Gaza must be lifted, that reflects the dynamic of the Egyptian population, the Egyptian masses wanting to see an end to the Palestinian suffering and wanting to see an end to Israeli occupation. But I think the other element that we should put into the mix is the international solidarity, because Palestine is not just at the heart of the Arab Spring, it's the heart of all progressive thinking internationally, that really we have to act in solidarity with the Palestinian people. There has to be an end to Israeli occupation, and Palestine has to be free. And there were demonstrations right across the world around the Nakba, to commemorate the Nakba. We obviously had demonstrations in London where MPs and many others spoke out in support of ending the siege on Gaza, and also of the flotilla that's going to be taking place in the third week of June, because that again is part of what we can do over here to support the Palestinian cause, is uniting behind if efforts such as the flotilla to Gaza, Britain to Gaza initiative, and also taking action ourselves to make sure that our voices are heard. And the idea of people protesting outside Parliament, for example, is very intrinsic. We can't assume that people know the support for the Palestinian people unless they actually see it on the street themselves. And that's why it's so important that people come out and demonstrate their support.
I mean, as well, Gaza, the continuing solidarity with the revolutions themselves is part and parcel of this, because if they're brought to a halt, either in Egypt or in Tunisia, then it leaves the Palestinian cause more isolated than it would otherwise be. And there have been some serious conflicts in recent weeks between the revolutionary forces and the existing government in Tunisia, haven't there?
Yeah, there has been. I mean, we've had like the start of what some may call a counter-revolution. I mean, there's been a lot of chaos, problems. Recently, it was leaked that the military would be planning a coup if the Nahda party win, and because of that,
that's the main Muslim party,
the main Islamist party, that's also has a lot of popularity right now in Tunisia, and if they do win, they had said that they will plan a military coup, and because of that, there's been a lot of protests and a lot of bloodshed again and censorship. And however, according to most people in Tunisia, they're seeing this as a delay rather than an actual obstacle. They're still trying to plan that July 24th will be the day of elections.
And so one other aspect of this is obviously has been the Fatah-Hamas agreement. How do you read that in terms of its impact on the capability of Palestinians to mobilise in the way that we saw last Sunday?
I think all opportunities to try and overcome division amongst the Palestinian people themselves have to be welcomed, because that's been a real stumbling block for the Palestinians themselves. But I think that also the fact that on the Oslo Accords, on every other attempt for so-called peace negotiations, that obviously the parties to that negotiation were present in recently, the issue of refugees has always been left off the table as an issue to be resolved later or not at all. And what the Nakba protests have done is bring refugees right back to the centre of the equation. It is impossible to ignore the issue of 5 million Palestinians living outside their homeland. And it is only the Palestinians who are told, as refugees, you have no right to return. When actually they have all their rights under international law, under the UN resolutions. Any other population in the world have their rights respected to return to their homeland. The Palestinians are unique in that respect. And so I think for those negotiations and that discussion, it's obviously an ongoing process. But I think the really positive thing about these protests has been that the refugees are at the heart of the equation again.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, we're joined on the phone now by an activist, popular blogger, Dr. Mona El Farah, who's in Gaza. Welcome to the programme.
Hello, yes. Hello.
Could you tell us? We've been discussing here in the studio the impact of the Arab Spring on the Palestinian mobilisation, particularly last Sunday. How do you see that?
I see that it has great impact on the Palestinian internal situation to start with, and this resulted in the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, which is the first step towards uniting ourselves to be standing strong in front of the occupation. Besides that, this is going to alleviate the partial alleviation of the siege, and it will affect daily lives of the Palestinians inside, especially Palestinians inside Gaza Strip. So it is a great impact, I believe.
And what's the atmosphere? The atmosphere now in Gaza after the weekend's events? Because I think many of us watching it around the globe were enormously heartened by the scale of the mobilisation, by its audacity. Is that shared among Palestinians in Gaza?
It's united Palestinian more and more in Gaza. Palestinians, we're all under one flag, which is the Palestinian flag, to commemorate the Nakba anniversary. But still, it has shadow. It makes Palestinians believe more and more about the racist and colonial nature of the Israeli occupation of Israel. Israel that has been founded on the ruins of Palestinian refugees, and again, while people are in totally peaceful protest, the answer was artillery shelling, and tens of people have been injured, while the protest was completely peaceful.
We're used to the Israeli state responding with that level of ferocity, but do you think they were actually caught off guard by the scale of the mobilisations?
Yes, they were surprised. They were astonished to the size of the mobilization and the determination of people as well, while commemorating the Nakba anniversary. So Israel is usually brutal in their reaction, but this time it was really very hard. Artillery shelling, not as usual. Massive population, and the reaction is artillery shelling. So in the end, it is for the sake of the Palestinian cause, and we need more mobilization cause and more mobilization to the idea of right of return, because it is our right according to UN Resolution 194 and all the international UN resolutions that deal with Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Do you think as well, it seems not only that the Israeli state was perhaps disconcerted by the scale of the mobilisations, but the major powers, the United States, also seem to have been unusually silent over the events.
Yeah, and this is again great success for us, for the population, for the Palestinian people under occupation, and for people who are fighting against injustice, our friends who are in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Yes, I agree. It was great reaction by the USA, and it is great success for us. I feel relieved. I feel sorry for the lost injured people and what happened, but in the end, it is for the support of our cause.
Monel Farah from Gaza, thanks very much for joining us. Sarah, just let me bring you in on that last issue of the reaction of both the Israeli state and the major powers. It seems to me that, you know, if we take ourselves from the moment when Obama came to power and there was the talk of the stopping of the settlements and so forth, that kind of process, insofar as it was ever a process, is now sidelined by these events, it seems.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that there's been a really positive dynamic that's been put in motion, mainly, I would say, by Egypt and the fall of Mubarak in Egypt. And in my view, the US is running to catch up. It's desperate to maintain control in the region, but it basically issued an ultimatum when Obama came to power about settlements. Israel refused to stand down, and therefore Obama blinked and allowed Israel to continue. But I think what the fall of Mubarak has done is shift things in a different dynamic, and so really Israel and the US are running to catch up. The idea that you had not just the US but David Cameron calling on Israel to release the taxes that was owed to the Palestinian people, and that Israel actually had to back down and release those taxes, is quite significant. But I think that, I mean, referring back to the events that we've just seen on Sunday, Israel is still trying to get away with not even taking responsibility for the killing of the people on the border. I mean, the fact that they claimed that it was the Lebanese soldiers themselves who shot the protesters, and that somehow this is part of some Iranian plot, when actually what you had were Palestinians and their supporters returning back to their homeland. They were trying to enter into illegally occupied country that was theirs, that Israel is illegally occupying. And I think that the powerful message that came out, I mean, made, you know, massive steps forward, massive strides forward, and obviously they suffered greatly for the actions they took. But that has really shown, it's thrown a light on Israel's continuing occupation and really shown the way forward for us all in supporting Palestinian rights.
Karatha, we've talked about the impact of the Arab Spring on the logic of the Palestinian struggle, but obviously there's a reciprocal relationship as well. And do you think, I mean, just the kind of sheer heroism of those people that we saw, you know, walking forward over what might have been that the onlookers were shouting at them that this is, you know, these are landmines that you're going through, and they persisted in moving forward. Do you think when in Tunisia or in Egypt, when people see that kind of bravery from the Palestinians, it makes them less likely to accept half a revolution where they are? Oh,
definitely. I think watching them, I mean, people have always been inspired by the Palestinians anyway, but seeing their reactions to their revolution and showing their bravery is only going to just push the Tunisians, the Egyptians and everyone else push even more for their own revolution, and for the sake of the Palestinians. They have been inspired, they always will be, but they're definitely even more inspired this time round as well.
Do you think perhaps you can, I mean, the Western intervention in Libya, I think many people saw as an attempt by the major powers to get a grip on a developing revolutionary situation that they had no control over, and you know that seems to have at least partially worked for them. But this is a kind of counter blow to that. It releases revolutionary energy again rather than allows the imperial powers to control it. Do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think just the like I said before, the inspiration from the Palestinians is just going to show people even more they don't want to stand down. I mean, in Tunisia, for instance, they had protests with the new French ambassador that they sent to them. One of the main reasons was his stance on Iraq. There is that whole solidarity there. Once we do have a complete revolution, it will help all of us around. And I mean, recently we've had also, over the past weekend, we've had a terrorist suspects arrested, possibly Al-Qaeda. I mean, they are Algerian and Libyan. People are also assuming that it could be from neighbouring countries who don't want a revolutionary process to spread onto their countries and kind of halt ours. And these things, people are waking up to it. They are seeing that there's more puppets at play than those inside their own country.
Sarah, just on this wider point, I mean, you know, the only model that we've had in the past of pan-Arabism was a pan-Arabism of states, of Nasser's Egypt, of Syria at the time. But this is an international solidarity at the level of people, isn't it? A different dynamic, perhaps.
Absolutely, and it's one of the. I think we're living through one of those historic times that I feel very privileged to be able to be part of, and I think it follows on for me quite well from the first flotilla and the Mavi Marmara, in the sense that what we are seeing is that individuals acting together in a coordinated and focused way can change the course of history. We've seen that in Tunisia, we've seen it in Egypt, and we've seen it time and time again in Palestine, but yet again, and we're not asking everyone to walk through minefields as the brave people did yesterday. We're just asking for everybody to take what action they can do. So whether it's boycotting Israeli goods, whether it's coming out on demonstration, whether it's writing to an MP, whether it's going to the Britain to Gaza website and supporting the flotilla, whether it's going to public meetings, Palestine Solidarity Campaign organisers, we're just asking people to get involved, because this is a historic time we're living through, and I feel that everyone really has got a part to play in that struggle that we're all involved in for peace and justice and freedom.
Well, thanks for that. Well, many of you, as expected, have been taken to the social media sites to give your thoughts on the Nakba. Here are just a few of your tweets.
Many factors forming Nakba protests yesterday, but one must be the refugee sellout revelation of Palestine papers.
All of this crackdown and arrest just hardens my support and resolve for Nakba. Israel and the Egyptian army look very bad at the moment.
63 years ago, my grandmother, pregnant, about to give birth, was taken out of her home in Palestine along with 700,000 other Palestinians.
The Palestinians are the first people to be offered a state 7 times, reject it 7 times, and set preconditions for discussing an 8th offer.
All you London Nakba protesters, had you been in your home countries, you would have probably been shot already.
Thank you both for joining us today. To play us out this week, popular Palestinian group Dam with their song Born Here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
שלום, נתן בבקשה. יכול להפסיק לצלם בבקשה ולתת לי את הציוד שלך? אל תצלם אותי, אל תצלם. זוהי עונת ציד, הטרף הוא עוד בית של יונה המנסה לשרוד תחת שלטון העית. בוא נעשה משהו אופטימי יותר, הרי כל יום אני מתעורר, רואה איזה 1000 שוטר, אולי הם באו לעצור סוחר. הוא פה או לא, הם באו להרוס את הבית שלה, שכן שלו. מה קורה פה? בוא השנאה סובבת את הגטו, למה קשה לו ומי יענה לו, לעם ואיפה שאלך תירוצים מקבלים את פניי.